Hello all, and welcome back to Tangents on Cracked Spines. If you're new here, I'm glad you're here, but maybe go back about 6 episodes to start the story from the beginning. As a quick intro, I'm Frankie, and we'll be reading with unedited personal commentary on classics. Or in reality, any story in the public domain. Listener discretion is advised, as some of the content holds adult themes and language. And I'm also known to use explicatives, though I'm trying to stop. We are currently reading The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. In the last episode, The Invisible Man, we learned his name is Griffin, and that he is an albino chemist who has turned invisible. Happened to break into a Dr. Kemp's house who he went to school with. And then couldn't understand why Dr. Kemp didn't know who he was when he couldn't physically see the man. Dr. Kemp thought he was being pranked, and after some manhandling and general violence by the Invisible Man, which is not unusual, he decided to let him eat his food and stay, and let him lock himself into his bedroom, into Dr. Kemp's bedroom, master bedroom, and he wound up staying awake all night reading through the articles from the day before about the Invisible Man, and muttering to himself about how any of this works. And when the Invisible Man awoke, he heard crashing and thrashing in his bedroom because Griffin has zero respect for others' property. And now we resume with Chapter 19. Certain First Principles. "What's the matter?" asked Kemp, when the Invisible Man admitted him. "Nothing," was the answer. "But confound it, the smash!" "Fit of temper," said the Invisible Man. "Forgot this arm, it's sore." "You're rather liable to that sort of thing." "I am." Kemp walked across the room and picked up the fragments of broken glass. "All the facts are out about you," said Kemp, standing up with the glass in his hand. "All that happened in Ipping and down the hill, the world has become aware of its invisible citizen. But no one knows you are here." The Invisible Man swore. "The secret's out. I gather it was a secret. I don't know what your plans are, but of course I'm anxious to help you." The Invisible Man sat down on the bed. "I'm sorry, but why would you be anxious to help this man? He's got some serious anger issues. I would want him out of my house." "Anyways, there's breakfast upstairs," said Kemp, speaking as easily as possible, and he was delighted to find his strange guest rose willingly. I'm assuming he knows this because his, dress coat, or his dressing gown, rose. Kemp led the way up the narrow staircase to the belvedere. "Before we can do anything else," said Kemp, "I must understand a little bit more about this invisibility of yours." He sat down, after one nervous glance out of the window, with the air of a man who has talking to do. His doubts of the sanity of the entire business flashed and vanished again as he looked across to where Griffin sat at the breakfast table. A headless, handless dressing gown, wiping unseen lips on a miraculously held serviette. That has to be interesting, to be eating breakfast with your dressing gown. "It's simple enough." "Yes, because invisibility is always simple." Jiminy Christmas. "And credible enough." "Well, obviously it's credible. You're invisible," said Griffin, putting the serviette aside and leaning the invisible head on an invisible hand. Anybody else getting, like, Crooked Man rhyme vibes? But instead of a crooked little man, it's an invisible little man? No? Okay. No doubt to you, but... Kemp laughed. Well, yes, to me it seemed wonderful at first, no doubt. But now, great God. But we will do great things yet. I came on the stuff first at... Chesiltoe. Chesiltoe? I went there after I left for London. You know I dropped medicine and took up physics? No, well, I did. Light fascinated me. Ah, optical density. The whole subject is a network of riddles. A network with solutions glimmering elusively, though. And being but 22 and full of enthusiasm, I said, I will devote my life to this. This is worthwhile. You know what fools we are at 22? Well, yes, people in their early 20s tend to be a little foolish because they're about to, out and about trying to make their first mistakes to learn from. Fools then or fools now, said Kemp, as though knowing could be any satisfaction to a man. But I went to work, like a... Nope. And I had hardly worked and thought about the matter 6 months before light came through one of the meshes suddenly, blindingly. Also, the reason I said nope is because he uses, a word that was fine during the time this was written, but it is not appropriate to be said nowadays. And in case you couldn't figure it out, that word begins with an N. I found a general principle of pigments and refraction. A formula, a geometrical expression involving 4 dimensions. Okay, I know that he's talking about science, and as a science major myself, I am actually pretty interested in how he describes it. But just throwing out there, you know, when I was in middle school, I grew up in a city, and when we had a round robin circle where we all had to read a paragraph of a story, and we were reading a Mark Twain novel, I, at that time, was like, well, it says it in the story. I should, you know, I'm reading the story aloud. And I have since grown to be like, yeah, no, I can censor that kind of language. Doesn't matter if they used it. Alright. I found a general principle of pigments and refraction. A formula, a geometrical expression involving 4 dimensions. Okay, from the science thing, I mean, pigment does, depending on the color of the pigment, depends on what light it absorbs and refracts. Or reflects, rather. Refracts means that it splits, or moves. And pigment is generally a protein. Melanin, anyways. So, like, geometrical expression, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It's been a while since I've taken physics or biochem, or chem. But that makes sense so far, involving fools, common men, even common mathematicians do not know anything of what some general expression may mean to the student of molecular physics. In the books that Tramp has hidden, there are marvels, miracles. But this was not a method, it was an idea that might lead to a method by which it would be possible, without changing any other property of matter, except in some instances colors, to lower the refractive index of a substance, solid or liquid, to that of air, so far as all practical purposes are concerned. Well, would be cool. Phew, said Kemp. That's odd, but still I don't quite see. I can understand that thereby you could spoil a valuable stone, but personal invisibility is a far cry. Precisely, said Griffin. But consider, visibility depends on the action of the visible bodies on light. That is true. Either a body absorbs light, or it reflects or refracts it, or does all of these things. If it neither reflects nor refracts nor absorbs light, it cannot of itself be visible. Yes. You see an opaque red box, for instance, because the color absorbs some of the light and reflects the rest. All the red part of the light to you. If it did not absorb any particular part of the light, but reflected it all, then it would be a shining white box. Silver! A diamond box would neither absorb much of the light nor reflect much of from the general surface, but just here and there where the surfaces were favorable, the light would be reflected and refracted, so that you would get a brilliant appearance of flashing reflections and translucencies. A sort of skeleton of light. A glass box would not be so brilliant nor so clearly visible as a diamond box, because there would be less refraction and reflection. See that? From certain points of view, you would see quite clearly through it. Some kinds of glass would be more visible than others. A box of flint glass would be brighter than a box of ordinary window glass. A box of very thin common glass would be hard to see in bad light because it would absorb hardly any light and refract and reflect very little. I'm going to assume that this guy, while his science is pretty good, doesn't quite remember what refracting or reflecting is either. Refracting is like when light goes through a prism and you see the rainbow. Reflecting is when it bounces it back. And if you put a sheet of common white glass in water, still more if you put it in some denser liquid than water, it would vanish almost altogether, because light passing from water to glass is only slightly refracted, or reflected, or indeed affected in any way. It is almost as invisible as a jet of coal gas or hydrogen is in the air, and for precisely the same reason. Yes, said Kemp, that is pretty plain sailing. And here's another fact you will know to be true. If a sheet of glass is smashed, Kemp, and beaten into powder, it becomes much more visible while it is in the air. It becomes at last an opaque white powder. This is because the powdering multiplies the surfaces of the glass at which refraction and reflection occur. It also has lots of little cracks in it. And the cracks break up the bonds a little. In the sheet of glass, there are only two surfaces. In the powder, the light is reflected or refracted by each grain it passes through, and very little gets right through the powder. But if the white powdered glass is put into water, it forthwith vanishes. The powdered glass and water have much the same refractive index. That is, the light undergoes very refraction or reflection in passing from one to the other. You make the glass invisible by putting it into a liquid of nearly the same refractive index. A transparent thing becomes invisible if it is put in any medium of almost the same refractive index. And if you will consider only a second, you will see also that the powder of glass might be made to vanish in air, if its refractive index could be made the same as that of air. For then, that would be no refraction or reflection as the light passed from glass to air. Yes, said Kemp. But a man's not powdered glass. I mean, that's kind of my thought process here. You know? 'Cause, we're made up of a lot more than one kind of molecule, crystallized into a certain position. No, said Griffin. He's more transparent. Nonsense. That from a doctor. How one forgets. Have you already forgotten your physics in 10 years? Yeah, it's been almost that long for me. Just think of all the things that are transparent and seem not to be so. Paper, for instance, is made up of transparent fibers, and it is white and opaque only for the same reason that a powder of glass is white and opaque. Well, it gets bleached. Oil, white paper, fill up the interstices between the particles with oil so that there's no longer refraction or reflection except at the surfaces, and it will become as transparent as glass. Oh, he means like cooking oil, not like crude oil. Yes, that would be true. But that's different. And not only paper, but cotton fiber, linen fiber, wool fiber, woody fiber, and bone Kemp, flesh Kemp, hair Kemp, nails and nerves Kemp. In fact, the whole fabric of a man, except the red of his blood and the black pigment of hair, are all made up of transparent, colorless tissue. So little surfaces to make us visible one to the other. For the most part, the fibers of a living creature are no more opaque than water. Yes and no? Great heavens, said Kemp. Of course! I was thinking only last night of the sea larva and all jellyfish. Now you have me, and all that I knew and had in mind a year after I left London, 6 years ago. But I kept it to myself. I had to do my work under frightful disadvantages. Oliver, my professor, was a scientific bounder, a journalist by instinct, a thief of ideas. He was always prying. And you know the knavish system of the scientific world. I simply would not publish and let him share my credit. I went on working. I got nearer and nearer, making my formula into an experiment, a reality. I told no living soul, because I meant to flash my work upon the world with crushing effect and become famous at a blow. I took up the question of pigments to fill up certain gaps, and suddenly, not by design, but by accident, I made a discovery in physiology. Yes, you know the red coloring matter of blood. It can be made white, colorless, and remain with all the function it has now. Well, part of what makes blood red is iron. Oxidized iron. Kemp gave a cry of incredulous amazement. The invisible man rose and began pacing the little study. You may well exclaim, I remember that night. It was late at night. In the daytime one was bothered with the gaping, silly students, and I was worked then sometimes till dawn. It came suddenly, splendid and complete in my mind. I was alone, the laboratory was still, with the tall lights burning brightly and silently. In all my great moments I have been alone. One could make an animal, a tissue, transparent. One could make it invisible. All except the pigments. I could be invisible. The pigments are what make you visible, honey. I said suddenly, realizing what it meant to be an albino with such knowledge. It was overwhelming. I left the filtering I was doing and went and stared out of the great window at the stars. I could be invisible, I repeated. I knew they were going to do this because he was They made him albino because they figured it would be easier to make him invisible. And I'm not sure they're wrong. But still, to do such a thing would be to transcend magic, and I beheld, unclouded by doubt, a magnificent vision of all that invisibility might mean to a man. The mystery, the power, the freedom. Drawbacks I saw none. You have only to think, and I, a shabby, poverty-struck, hemmed-in demonstrator teaching fools in a provincial college, might suddenly become this. I ask you, Kemp, if you, anyone I tell you, would have flung himself upon that research, and I worked 3 years, and every mountain of difficulty I toiled over showed another from its summit, the infinite details, and the exasperation. A professor, a provincial professor, always prying. When are you going to publish this work of yours? Was his everlasting question. And the students, a cramped means. 3 years I had of it, and after 3 years of secrecy and exasperation, I found that to complete it was impossible. Impossible. How? Asked Kemp. Money, said the invisible man. Fair. I mean, money makes lots more things possible, to a certain extent. And went again to stare out of the window. He turned around abruptly. I robbed the old man. Robbed my father. The money was not his, and he shot himself. Wow! Was not expecting that. But one, what kind of person are you to rob from your own family? I mean, you did rob from a church, which is also a big no-no for most people. And to top it all off, you can literally blame yourself for his suicide? Yikes! And I mean yikes. Anyways, Chapter 20. At the house in Great Portland Street. For a moment, Kemp sat in silence, staring at the back of the headless figure at the window. Then he started, struck by a thought, rose, took the invisible man's arm, and turned him away from the outlook. You are tired, he said, and while I sit, you walk about. Have my chair. He placed himself between Griffin and the nearest window. For a space, Griffin sat silent, and then he resumed abruptly. I had left the Chesilstowe cottage already, he said, when that happened. It was last December. I had taken a room in London, a large unfurnished room in a big, ill-managed lodging house in a slum near Great Portland Street. The room was soon full of the appliances I had bought with his money. The work was going on steadily, successfully, drawing near an end. I was like a man emerging from a thicket and suddenly coming on some unmeaning tragedy. I went to bury him. My mind was still on this research, and I did not lift a finger to save his character. I remember the funeral, the cheap hearse, the scant ceremony, the windy, frost-bitten hillside, and the old college friend of his who read the service over him. A shabby, black, bent-over old man with a sniveling cold. I remember walking back to the empty house, through the place that had once been a village and was now patched and tinkered by the jerry builders into the ugly likeness of a town. Every way the roads ran out at last into the descended fields and ended in rubble heaps and rank wet weeds. I remember myself as a gaunt black figure going along the slippery, shiny pavement, and the strange sense of detachment I felt from the squalid respectability, the sordid commercialism of the place. I did not feel a bit sorry for my father. He seemed to me to be the victim of his own foolish sentimentality. The current can't require my attendance at his funeral. But it was really not my affair. What a heartless man! But going along the high street, my old life came back to me for a space. For I met the girl I had known 10 years since, and our eyes met. Something moved me to turn back and talk to her. She was a very ordinary person. It was all like a dream, that visit to the old places. I did not feel then that I was lonely, that I had come out from the world into a desolate place. I appreciated my loss of sympathy, but I put it down to the general inanity of things. Re-entering my room seemed like the recovery of reality. There were the things I knew and loved. There stood the apparatus, the experiments arranged and waiting, and now there was scarcely a difficulty left beyond the planning of details. You know, you would think that hearing his backstory would make you like the main character more. I think I hate him more than I hate Dr. Frankenstein. I liked Frankenstein's monster. Like, his monster had more humanity in him. Oh, boy. But the Invisible Man, he's heartless. Pardon, I've got a little bit of a sniffle going on. I will tell you, Kemp, sooner or later, all the complicated processes. We need not go into that for now. For the most part, saving certain gaps I chose to remember. Wow. They are written in cipher in those books that tramp has hidden. We must hunt him down. We must get those books again. But the essential phase was to place the transparent object, whose refractive index was to be lowered between two radiating centers of a sort of ethereal vibration. Ethereal vibration? Of sound or light? Or electricity? I wonder. What counts as an ethereal vibration, and how do you create one? Sorry. Of which I will tell you more fully later. No, not those Rontgen vibrations. I don't know that these others of mine have been described. Well, that's a poetic way to not have to go into the science. Yet they are obvious enough. I needed 2 little dynamos, and these I worked with a cheap gas engine. My first experiment was with a bit of white wool fabric. It was the strangest thing in the world to see it in the flicker of the flashes, soft and white, and then to watch it fade like a wreath of smoke and vanish. I could scarcely believe I had done it. I put my hand into the emptiness, and there was the thing, as solid as ever. I felt it awkwardly and threw it on the floor. And I had a little trouble finding it again. No, duh, honey. You made it invisible and then threw it on the floor? Yeah, you're gonna have a hard time finding it again. And then came a curious experience. I heard a meow behind me, and turning, saw a lean white cat, very dirty, on the cistern cover outside the window. Oh, no, you did not. You didn't experiment on a cat. A thought came into my head. Everything ready for you, I said, and went to the window, opened it, and called softly. She came in, purring. The poor beast was starving, and I gave her some milk. Ah, yes, because milk to a most likely lactose-intolerant cat is a great thing. Good luck cleaning up invisible cat diarrhea. All my food was in a cupboard in the corner of the room. After that, she went smelling around the room, evidently with the idea of making herself at home. The invisible rag upset her a bit. You should have seen her spit at it. But I made her comfortable on the pillow of my truckle bed, and I gave her butter to get her to wash. Pardon. And you processed her? I processed her, but giving drugs to a cat is no joke, Kemp. That's true. And the process failed. Failed in 2 particulars. These were the claws and the pigment stuff. What is it? At the black of the eye in a cat, you know? Tapetum. Yes, the tapetum. It didn't go. After I'd given the stuff to bleach the blood and done certain other things to her, I gave the beast opium. You drugged a cat with opium and put her and the pillow she was sleeping on the apparatus. You're lucky you didn't kill her. Well, that might be wrong. You might have killed her. After all, the rest had faded and vanished. And after all that had faded and vanished, there remained 2 little ghosts of her eyes. Odd. I can't explain it. She was bandaged and clamped, of course, so I had her safe, but she woke while she was still misty and meowed dismally. And someone came knocking. It was an old woman from downstairs who suspected me of vivisecting. Drink-sodden old creature, with only a white cat to care for in the world. I mean, I wouldn't put it past you to be vivisecting. Oh. I whipped out some chloroform, applied it, and answered the door. Did I hear a cat? She asked. My cat? Not here, said I, very politely. I don't believe you know how to be polite. She was a little doubtful and tried to peer past me into the room. Strange enough to her, no doubt. Bare walls, uncurtained windows, truckle bed, with the gas engine vibrating, and the seethe of the radiant points, and the faint ghastly stinging of chloroform in the air. She had to be satisfied at last and went away. "How long did it take?" asked Kemp. 3 or 4 hours. The cat, the bones and sinews and fat were the last to go, and the tips of the colored hairs. And, as I say, the black part of the eye, though iridescent stuff it is, wouldn't go at all. It was night outside, long before the business was over, and nothing was to be seen but the dim eyes and the claws. Well, that's how you get ghost cats, my friend. Having an idiot, heartless idiot, experiment on his neighbor's cat. I stopped the gas engine, felt for and stroked the beast, which was still insensible, and then, being tired, left it sleeping on the invisible pillow. Wait, the pillow went invisible too? And went to bed. I found it hard to sleep. I lay awake thinking weak, aimless stuff, going over the experiment over and over again, or dreaming feverishly of things growing misty and vanishing about me, until everything, the ground I stood on, vanished, and so I came to that sickly, falling nightmare one gets. About 2, the cat began meowing about the room. I tried to hush it by talking to it, and then I decided to turn it out. You make it invisible, and then you put it outside where anybody can trip over it or run over it, because carriages were a thing, and not have seen it. You're a terrible person. I remember the shock I had when striking a light. There were just the round eyes shining green, and nothing around them. I would have given it milk, but I hadn't any more. It wouldn't be quiet, it just sat down and meowed at the door. I tried to catch it with an idea of putting it out the window, but it wouldn't be caught. It vanished. Then it began meowing in different parts of the room. At last I opened the window and made a bustle. I suppose it went out at last. I never saw any more of it. Then, heaven knows why, I fell thinking of my father's funeral again, and the dismal, windy hillside, until the day had come. I found sleeping was hopeless, and locking my door after me, wandered out into the morning streets. "You don't mean to say there's an invisible cat at large?" said Kemp. "If it hasn't been killed," said the invisible man. "Why not?" "Why not?" said Kemp. I didn't mean to interrupt. "It's very probably been killed," said the invisible man. "It was alive 4 days after, I know, and down a grating in the Great Titchfield Street, because I saw a crowd round the place trying to see whence the meowing came from." He was silent for the best part of a minute, and then he resumed abruptly. "I remember that morning before the change very vividly. I must have gone up Great Portland Street. I remember the barracks in Albany Street, and the horse soldiers coming out, and the last I found, the summit of Primrose Hill. It was a sunny day in January, one of those sunny, frosty days that came before the snow. This year, my weary brain tried to formulate the position, to plot out a plan of action. Sorry, I keep getting distracted. My one friend is pregnant and actually has a cold and can't do anything about it because of her condition. So, I'm trying to give her some moral support. My weary brain tried to formulate the position, to plot out a plan of action. I was surprised to find, now that my prize was within my grasp, how inclusive its attainment seemed. As a matter of fact, I was worked out. The intense stress of nearly 4 years' continuous work left me incapable of any strength of feeling. I was apathetic. I'm pretty sure you were always apathetic. And I tried in vain to recover the enthusiasm of my first inquiries, the passion of discovery that enabled me to compass even the downfall of my father's gray hairs. Nothing seemed to matter. I saw pretty clearly this was a transient mood, due to overwork and want of sleep, and that either by drugs or rest it would be possible to recover my energies. I mean, you apparently have opium in your house. You drugged a cat with it. Yeah. All I could think clearly was that the thing had to be carried through. The fixed idea still ruled me, and soon, for the money I had, was almost exhausted. You mean the money you stole from your father? I looked about me at the hillside, with children playing and girls watching them, and tried to think of all the fantastic advantages an invisible man would have in the world. After a time, I crawled home, took some food and a strong dose of strychnine. Strychnine? And went to sleep in my clothes on my unmade bed. Strychnine is a grand tonic, Kemp. It takes the flabbiness out of a man. It's the devil, said Kemp. It's the Paleolithic in a bottle. I woke vastly invigorated and rather irritable, you know? I know the stuff. And there was someone rapping at the door. It was my landlord with threats and inquiries. An old Polish Jew in a long gray coat and greasy slippers. Yeah, you have some problems, my man. I had been tormenting a cat in the night. He was sure. The old woman's tongue had been busy. You had been tormenting the cat. He insisted on knowing all about it. The laws in this country against vivisection were very severe. He might be liable. I denied the cat. Then the vibration of the little glass engine could be felt all over the house, he said. That was true, certainly. He edged round me into the room, peering about over his German silver spectacles, and a sudden dread came into my mind that he might carry away something of my secret. I tried to keep between him and the concentrating apparatus I had arranged, and that only made him more curious. No shit, you were acting sketchy. What was I doing? Why was I always alone and secretive? Was it legal? Was it dangerous? I paid nothing but the usual rent. His had always been the most respectable house, in a disreputable neighborhood. Suddenly, my temper gave way. I told him to get out. He began to protest, to jabber of his right of entry. In a moment, I had him by the collar. Something ripped, and he went spinning out into his own passage. I slammed and locked the door and sat down quivering. You're lucky he didn't bring the constables. You're such a jackass. He made a fuss outside, which I disregarded, and after a time he went away. But this brought matters to a crisis. I did not know what he would do, nor even if he had the power to do. What he had the power to do. To move to fresh apartments would have meant delay. Altogether, I had barely £20 left in the world, for the most part in a bank, and I could not afford that. That's fair, but also, you're an idiot. Vanish. It was irresistible. Then there would be an inquiry, the sacking of my room. At that thought of the possibility of my work being exposed or interrupted at its very climax, I became very angry and active. You became very angry? It sounds like you're a stone's throw from being the Hulk. Anyways. Jiminy Christmas. I hurried out with my 3 books of notes, my checkbook, the tramp has them now, and directed them from the nearest post office to a house of call for letters and parcels in Great Portland Street. I tried to go out noiselessly. Coming in, I found my landlord going quietly upstairs. He had heard the door close, I suppose. You would have laughed to see him jump aside on the landing as I came tearing after him. He glared at me as I went by him, and I made the house quiver with the slamming of my door. I heard him come shuffling up to my floor, hesitate, and go down. I set to work upon my preparations forthwith. Well, yeah, you're a hulking man, you have anger issues, and you're late on your rent. Again, I'm surprised he didn't call the constables. It was all done that evening and night, while I was still sitting under the sickly, drowsy influence of the drugs that discolorize blood. There came a repeated knocking at the door. It ceased, footsteps went away and returned, and the knocking was resumed. There was an attempt to push something under the door. A blue paper. Then, in a fit of irritation, I rose and went and flung the door wide open. "Now then," said I. It was my landlord, with a notice of ejectment or something. He held it out to me, saw something odd about my hands, I expect, and lifted his eyes to my face. For a moment he gasped. Then he gave a sort of inarticulate cry, dropped candle and writ together, and went blundering down the dark passageway to the stairs. I shut the door, locked it, and went to the looking-glass. Then I understood his terror. My face was white, like white stone. I mean, he's mentioned that he's albino, so he did have to clarify, 'cause can't see the blood under the skin then. But also, I hope the candle went out when he dropped it, otherwise you're setting fire to the place. But it was all horrible. I had not expected the suffering. A night of racking anguish, sickness, and fainting. Well, of course you didn't. Because, thankfully, at this point, the cat you experimented on, you had conked out with opium. And you put a bunch of drugs into your body that bleached iron and hem. Like, I imagine that it had to change the composition of a lot of things. Maybe that's why you're so angry. I set my teeth, though my skin was presently afire, all my body afire, but I lay there grim like death. I understood now how it was the cat had howled until I chloroformed it. Lucky it was I lived alone and untended in my room. There were times when I sobbed and groaned and talked, but I stuck to it. I became insensible and woke languid in the darkness. The pain had passed. I thought I was killing myself, and I didn't care. I shall never forget that dawn and the strange horror of seeing that my hands had become as clouded as glass, and watching them grow clearer and thinner as the day went by, until at last I could see the sickly disorder of my room through them. Though I closed my transparent eyelids, my limbs became glassy, the bones and arteries faded, vanished, and the little white nerves went last. I gritted my teeth and stayed there to the end. At last
Only the dead tips of the fingernails remained, pallid and white, and the brown stain of some acid upon my fingers.
I'm sorry, the brown stain of an acid? You have a chemical burn that you didn't treat? Sorry.
I struggled up. At first, I was incapable as a swathed infant, stepping with limbs I could not see. I was weak and very hungry. I went and stared at nothing in my shaving glass, at nothing save where an attenuated pigment still remained behind the retina of my eyes, fainter than mist. I had to hang onto the table and press my forehead against the glass. It was only by a frantic effort of will that I dragged myself back to the apparatus and completed the process. I slept during the forenoon, pulling the sheet over my eyes to shut out the light, and about midday I was awakened again by knocking. I didn't think about that. If his eyelids are invisible, does that mean when he closes his eyes, he still sees everything? That would suck. Could be an advantage, like if you're in prison, but it would suck to never be able to close your eyes properly. I sat up and listened and heard a whispering. I sprang to my feet and as noiselessly as possible began to detach the connections of my apparatus and to distribute it about the room so as to destroy the suggestions of its arrangement. Presently the knocking was renewed and voices called, first my landlord's and then two others. To gain time I answered them. The invisible rag and pillow came to hand and I opened the window and pitched them out onto the cistern cover. As the window opened, a heavy crash came at the door. Someone had charged it with the idea of smashing the lock, but the stout bolts I had screwed up some days before stopped him. That startled me, made me angry. Again, you're an invisible hulk. Everything makes you angry. I began to tremble and do things hurriedly. I tossed together some loose paper, straw, packing paper, and so forth in the middle of the room, then turned on the gas. Are you kidding me? Other people live in this place. You are not about to blow the place up. Heavy blows began to rain upon the door. I could not find the matches. I beat my hands on the wall with rage. I turned down the gas again, stepped out of the window on the cistern cover, very softly lowered the sash, and sat down, secure and invisible, but quivering with anger to watch events. They split a panel, I saw, and in another moment they had broken away the staples of the bolts and stood in the open doorway. It was the landlord and his two stepsons, sturdy young men of 3 or 24. Behind them fluttered the old hag of a woman from downstairs. You may imagine their astonishment to find the room empty. One of the younger men rushed to the window at once, flung it up, and stared out. His staring eyes and thick-lipped, bearded face came a foot from my face. I was half-minded to hit his silly countenance, but I arrested my doubled fist. Ooh! You do have some, self-control. I don't believe it. Sorry. He stared right through me. So did the others as they joined him. The old man went and peered under the bed, and then they all made a rush for the cupboard. They had to argue about it at length in Yiddish and Cockney and English. They concluded I had not answered them, that their imagination had deceived them. A feeling of extraordinary elation took the place of my anger as I sat outside the window and watched these 4 people, for the old lady came in, glancing suspiciously about her like a cat, trying to understand the riddle of my behavior. The old man... So far as I could understand his patois, I agreed with the old lady that I was a vivisectionist. The sons protested in garbled English that I was an electrician and appealed to the dynamos and radiators.
They were all nervous about my arrival, although I found subsequently that they had bolted the front door. The old lady peered into the cupboard and under the bed, and one of the young men pushed up the register and stared up the chimney. One of my fellow lodgers, a costermonger who shared the opposite room with a butcher, appeared on the landing, and he was called in and told incoherent things. Okay, just throwing out there, it's been made clear that people can see his clothes, so is this the only set of clothes that's invisible, or is he out on the roof in his birthday suit? It occurred to me that the radiators, if they fell into the hands of some acute, well-educated person, would give me away too much. And watching my opportunity, I came into the room and tilted one of the little dynamos off its fellow on which it was standing and smashed both apparatus. Then, while they were trying to explain the smash, I dodged out the room and went softly downstairs. I went into one of the sitting rooms and waited until they came down, still speculating and argumentative, all a little disappointed at finding no horrors, and all a little puzzled how they stood legally towards me. Can I just say that you are a horror? Knowing you is a horror. So they didn't find a vivisected cat, thankfully. You are still a horrible person. Then I slipped up again with a box of matches, fired my heap of paper and rubbish, put the chairs and bedding thereby, led the gas to the affair by means of an India rubber tube, and waving a fireball to the room, left it for the last time. "You fired the house?" exclaimed Kemp. "Fired the house. It was the only way to cover my trail. And no doubt it was insured." "Yeah, hoping everybody got out, you asshole." I slipped the bolts of the front door quietly and went out into the street. I was invisible, and I was only just beginning to realize the extraordinary advantage of my invisibility gave me. My head was already teeming with plans of all the wild and wonderful things I had now impunity to do. Oh, boy. This is the second book where I don't like the main character. Actually, I despise the main character. Anyways, and that's where we'll end for today. Thank you all for listening. Now, for typical podcast business, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and rate review on whichever podcast app you're using. Although a review on Apple Podcasts helps boost my ratings. And while 5 stars is appreciated, even other ratings, so long as they have reviews, tell me how I can improve. Sharing with your friends is also welcome. You can reach out to me via email at talkspod@gmail.com. Phonetically, that's Tango, Oscar, Charlie, Sierra, Paris, Oscar, Delta @gmail.com. So, Tangents on Cracked Spines, initials, pod. On Facebook at Tangents on Cracked Spines Book Club, or with a voice message at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. The Facebook page will have updates posted and polls to vote on the next story. If you're interested in merch, I made a few items for my personal Etsy shop, which I'll link in the description. Thank you all again for listening, and you have a wonderful day.